Did the Ayatollah regime in Iran win the first round? Despite President Trump's promises, it appears that Iran's Revolutionary Guards are declaring victory and issuing harsh threats against the United States. In an interview that he gave on Tuesday, the American president responded to reports that Iran is threatening to assassinate him and said that if something happens to me, the entire country is going to explode. And meanwhile, the United States is steadily tightening the noose around Iran as American aircraft carriers are already within the range of the Middle East region, and the United States Air Forces have moved fighter jets to bases in Jordan, same bases from which jets were launched that intercepted dozens of missiles that were launched against Israel in June. The American military already has enough forces available in the Middle East and within days is expected to complete the buildup of a significant force that will enable an attack with enormous power. So, what does the preparation on the ground look like for a possible American strike on Iran? We'll take a closer look. So welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you the full truth about what's happening here in Israel. And this week, the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln turned off its identification signals after passing Malaysia and is 4 sailing days away from the Persian Gulf. However, there has already been dramatic decline in protests in Iran due to the success of the regime's brutal repression, and some assess that the regime has defeated the protesters, at least for now. In Israel, the public is expecting, or perhaps hoping for, an action by President Trump, but it's unclear how he will proceed. On that note, a senior regime official accused Trump of being behind an American terrorist coup in his country. According to him, the wise and brave leadership of Khamenei, alongside the unity of the Iranian people, are what stopped the civil war that the United States initiated. For his part, President Trump declared this week that we will wipe them off the face of the earth. And in another interview he said, "I can't tell you what will happen in the future. We'll just wait and see what happens there." American officials have also said that the United States' maximum pressure is directed at the Iranian regime and not at the Iranian people. And speaking of the Iranian people, a security source estimates that the number of fatalities in the protests is close to 20,000 and that an even higher number of detainees are being tortured. And here in Israel, the heightened alert continues, along with increased readiness in defense but also in offense. There has been an unusual warning for Israeli civilians to prepare for direct hits on the home front. And moving on to Gaza, President Trump has exposed all the lies of the Hamas terrorist organization and announced that the time has come to move to Phase B in the ceasefire plan. Specifically, he said on Tuesday that he knows where the last fallen hostage Ran Gaveli is buried, but Hamas rushed to deny it and blamed Israel. However, senior officials in Jerusalem say that moving to Phase B is an Israeli interest and that the current situation serves Hamas, allowing it to strengthen and to build capabilities. It appears that an ultimatum will be presented to the terrorist organization. They have 2 months to disarm and to demilitarize, or the IDF will storm in. In addition, commanders in the organization are preparing to exit the Gaza Strip safely as part of arrangements in the second phase of Trump's plan to rehabilitate the Gaza Strip. What will the opening of the Rafah border crossing look like? And how will Israel prevent terror smuggling into Gaza? TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us a very hot topic in the Middle East that is poorly understood in the West, as northern Syria is turning into a ticking time bomb and Israel has reasons to worry. Following the United States withdrawal, the new Syrian regime of Abu Muhammad al-Julani took control of the Kurdish province in northern Syria, endangering Kurdish autonomy and raising the risk of releasing ISIS fighters, a regional threat that worries Israel as well. Mati will explore the question of whether Syria's interim president is a terrorist in a suit or an actual leader who is trying to improve conditions in his country. What are the interests of Syria's president just over a year after he assumed his office? We'll find out. Even though he has managed to meet with President Trump and other regional leaders, reach a fragile agreement with the Kurds, and also advance international legitimacy, the question mark remains: is it the drawing closer to the West continuing, and is he really sincere about having any kind of normalization with Israel, or he has some other interests that are more attached to his previous life as a jihadist? We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel on day 837 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups that are taking their orders from the Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. In just a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click that subscribe button and help us share the truth with the rest of the world. Speaking of which, the US Navy aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln turned off its identification signals after it passed Malaysia this week, and it is about 4 sailing days away from the Persian Gulf. There are also reports that the carrier, George Bush, is entering readiness to depart to the area. This is not just another headline, it's a story about the heavy movement of forces that lets the Ayatollah regime in Tehran know that the clock is ticking. But on the ground in Iran, the Revolutionary Guards are trying to convince the world that the protest has been broken, that the round is over, and fear is back in control of the streets. But the real question is whether this is the end of the story or only the quiet that they bought by force, right before outside pressure turns into operational pressure. Over the past week, and a week and a half maybe, the picture inside Iran has changed quickly. The protests reached a peak in several hotspots, and then came the moves that a regime knows how to carry out when it has no choice: internet shutdowns and increased use of live fire. The result on the ground is clear: a dramatic drop in the scale of the protests. The protesters didn't stop marching because their anger had disappeared or because any problems that they wanted the regime to solve were solved, but simply because the regime turned every trip into the street into a life-threatening experience. So the regime seems to have regained its control for now. But once again, all the problems that prompted people to protest in the first place are still here, and nothing has been resolved. Now, there are new problems, starting with the casualty numbers. According to data from Iranian human rights organizations that are operating outside of Iran, so far, 4,029 fatalities have been verified, and another approximately 9,000 reports are in the process of verification. This organization also estimates that the total number of victims in the current protest waves reached 13,078. These are numbers that explain why the street fell silent. Not because it gave up, but because it got hit hard. But inside this silence, the regime is doing something else, trying to buy time in regards to Washington. There are efforts through direct and indirect channels to create an infrastructure for dialogue that will prevent a military move. In simple words, delay, gain a week or two, restore control, and make sure that the street does not explode again. The big question mark hanging over all of this is President Trump. In the past, he promised that help is on the way, and the Iranian street heard it. The public in Israel heard that as well, but right now, in the diplomatic game, the United States is still not standing at the edge of the promise with overt action. Trump himself says simply, "I can't say what will happen in the future." He doesn't rule out a strike, and he also does not commit. On the one hand, that sounds like ambiguity. On the other hand, on the ground, you see a deployment and you see preparations that enables flexibility. The American military is strengthening forces in the Middle East, deploying warships, fighter aircraft, special forces and units, and more. The message is not "we decided." The message is "we are capable." And that is the heart of the deterrence. At the same time, Tehran is intensifying its own threats. In the Iranian parliament, it has already been said that any harm to the supreme leader will be considered a declaration of war on the entire Muslim world. But there have also been threats against President Trump, to which he responded that he gave instructions to the American military and that if anything happens to him, the response will be absolute, to the point of wiping out Iran. This is not just another exchange of messages. This is a war of perception connected to a real firepower system being built around Iran. And here in Israel, we are not sitting on the sidelines as the alert level rose across all the layers of the defensive echelon, including Arrow for long ranges, David Sling for medium ranges, and Iron Dome also for scenarios of interceptions of debris and follow-up brigades and barrages of rockets. Additionally, the Air Force received 3 new F-35 aircraft this week, and the array now stands at 48 aircrafts, with more advanced F-15 aircrafts in the pipeline. The idea is clear. If Iran tries to vent frustration at Israel is planning a counter-response that requires long preparations, and therefore, all this heightened readiness is happening even before the first shot was fired. Now to the big question. What can even be done from the air against a regime that does not know how to surrender? We are no longer talking about one quick strike, but about a multi-layer campaign meant first to neutralize strategic capabilities and then to choke the possibility of rehabilitation. At the top of the list is the nuclear program, starting with the facilities at Natanz and Fordo, and also Isfahan as an industrial link that feeds the machine. The strategic goal here is not only to demolish one facility, but to break the engineering and the logistical infrastructures around it, so there will be not a quick return to activity. Alongside the nuclear program are the missile and the drone arrays, which form the heart of Iranian deterrence and the direct threat to Israel and the US bases in the region are a key issue. Here, the emphasis is not only on launchers, but on production lines, component warehouses, and launch sites. The Revolutionary Guard's underground cities also enter the picture to crush launch waves before they even get underway. Another strategy is decapitation, striking the security top brass to create shock in the chain of command and paralyze Iran's response schedule. Also included in this category of targets are the war rooms and the control centers to turn off the country temporarily, disrupt communications, and isolate air defensive systems into islands with no connection between them. Also, the energy system and the economy, which form the regime's oxygen pipeline, even at the price of global sensitivity to oil in order to deepen internal pressure and push people back into the streets, this time while the regime is also busy defending itself against attacks. So, will Israel participate in this plan? Right now, there is no official declaration, but the operational picture says that Israel is preparing for every scenario, from full defense and an immediate response to an Iranian attack, to the possibility of coordinated action in maneuvers and preparations if a decision is made in Washington to go for a broad move. And what is pressuring the entire region is not only the strike itself, but the moment when other countries will see with their own eyes what the United States and Israel can do to a toxic and dangerous governing system like Iran when they operate together. To sum up, on the ground in Iran, the regime suppressed the first round, but in the skies and at sea, an entirely different round is now being built, and President Trump's decision can turn the threat into a working plan. So, as we shift our focus to the Gaza Strip, we ask if Washington and Jerusalem are already marking the next stage, and will the Gaza Strip now enter a new season in which Hamas is disarmed as we move into Phase B, following Trump's statements that the United States and Israel know where the last hostage casualty is located? We'll explain all of that soon, but first, I want to invite you to keep being ambassadors of the truth. Share our content and help us fight all the misinformation, the lies, and the propaganda. I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Vinya. For many Israelis, it's still about balancing reserve duty, work, and family. You come home, take off your uniform, and life doesn't slow down. I know that feeling. I've come back from reserve, trying to be present at home, catch up at work, and still feeling completely drained. So as this new year begins, I made a New Year's resolution. Not to do more, but to take better care of my health so that I can actually show up for the people who depend on me. And that's a decision that any of us can make moving into this new year. That's why I started using Vinia. It's an Israeli supplement made from red grape cells that helps support healthy blood flow to the heart, the brain, and the muscles. For me, that means better focus, steadier energy, and fewer days of that foggy feeling that you feel burnt out. I started using Vinia during my reserve duty, and I'm still using it today. So if you're thinking about a New Year's resolution that you can actually keep, taking care of your health is a good place to start. You can learn more at TBN or call 800-638-1944. Again, TBN. Now, we're shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip, where the yellow line has once again become a hot arena. Because every time Hamas cells try to operate in territory under the Israeli control, the IDF responds forcefully from the air and from the ground to prevent entrenchment and also explosive devices planting and the collection of weapons. This is not just another tactical incident. It is the clearest indication of why the diplomacy around Phase B cannot move forward while the ground keeps shifting. Speaking of diplomacy, this time it all started there. President Trump dropped a bomb this week that pulled Hamas out of the gray zone by saying that it seems that the United States knows where the fallen hostage, Staff Sergeant Ran Gavelli, is located. In Jerusalem, some were surprised by that wording, because we know a general area, but not an exact point. But from Hamas's perspective, this was a dangerous moment because the organization has been projecting ambiguity for months in order to drag out time by saying that we have no information. Now, the organization's spokesman, Hazem Qassam, has issued a dramatic statement claiming that Hamas provided all the information that it had, and he accused Israel of not allowing searches in areas under the IDF's control in the Gaza Strip, within the yellow line. For them, it is the same fixed formula: deny, turn the victim into the guilty party, and try to paint the agreement as something that Israel is blocking. The Gavelli family did not buy it, saying that Trump's words prove Hamas knows very well where Ran is and is knowingly and deliberately violating the framework, and they are demanding that the Israeli government and the American administration apply all their weight so that Hamas fulfill its part, or that sanctions be imposed on it. And in Israel, the Coordination for Prisoners and for Missing Persons, Gal Hirsch, stated that the family is being updated and that the recovery efforts are continuing constantly and in different ways. From here, it connects directly to Phase B of the ceasefire agreement, because senior officials in Israel say that the current stalemate serves Hamas. There is a ceasefire, aid and money are coming in, and the organization strengthens and builds capabilities. They describe a reality in which Hamas entrenches control over the population. It collects, builds new weapons, and also it rebuilds its strength. And therefore, moving to Phase B is an Israeli interest. But Phase B does not begin with rehabilitation. It begins with one demand: disarmament and also demilitarization. In Jerusalem, they speak about an ultimatum. If there is no disarmament, the IDF returns to fully fight in Gaza. The deadline has not yet been finalized, but they are talking about a framework of about 2 months. And at the same time, the Americans are trying to establish a new management mechanism, a peace council headed by President Trump, and under it, an executive council for Gaza that is also supposed to include senior officials from Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. On the ground, a Palestinian technocratic committee is supposed to operate for civilian management, but there too, there are limitations. According to the head of the committee, its authorities are limited to about half of the Gaza Strip, outside the yellow line, and expansion will be possible only alongside a gradual Israeli withdrawal. Disarmament is not within the committee's authority at all, but is supposed to be in the hands of an international force that has not yet been established. And within that gap, Hamas tries to hold both ends. On one hand, to declare it is facilitating the committee's work, and on the other hand, to insist that the bureaucracy and the security personnel array that it built since 2007 will remain active, meaning it will maintain control behind the scenes. All inside this, there are also the reports about another scenario, a safe exit for senior Hamas figures from the Gaza Strip as part of Phase B and the arrangements. This is with the destination that is mentioned being Turkey. According to those reports, there are commanders who are ready to leave, and there are others, mainly military, who refuse. The meaning is simple. Even within Hamas, there are those who understand the pressure that is approaching a breaking point, and they are looking for an exit out. Trump exposed the card of the last hostage casualty and pushed Gaza into a new track, either demilitarization within a short time or a return to a military move. And now, we will move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani for a look at recent events in the northern Syria arena. Will Israel wake up to a new border that is arming itself under a regime that looks like a leader but behaves like a terrorist in a suit? A moment before we turn to Mati, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth, share this content, leave a comment, and press on the like button. And now, we move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani for an in-depth look at a topic that usually slips past the mainstream media channels, but its impact on the Middle East is critical because the next great enemy of Israel in the Middle East could be Turkey. Northern Syria is turning into a ticking time bomb, and Israel has reasons to worry. Following the United States withdrawal from this area, the new Syrian regime of Abu Muhammad al-Julani took control of the Kurdish province in northern Syria, endangering Kurdish autonomy and raising the risk of the release of thousands of ISIS fighters, a regional threat that concerns both Israel and the other ethnic minorities in this region. So, over to you, Mati. Let us know what's happening.
What you just heard from Yair is the headline. Now let me tell you what it actually means. In northern Syria, Kurdish forces pulled back from the El Khul camp area under pressure from the new Syrian army. Now this is a camp holding thousands of families linked to ISIS. And the moment the Kurdish guards shift position, you get the same nightmare question once again. Do ISIS detainees and network slip out and into the chaos? Now there are claims of escapes. Some reports say hundreds ran. Others say many were caught once again. And the Syrian side says it's now taking responsibility for the camp and nearby prisons. Now why this matters right now, because this is not just a Syrian story, this is a regional security story. And it's moving closer and closer to Israel's border and Israel's population. So here's what's really matters. Here's what makes a difference on the ground. This is a power transfer, not a local clash. The Kurdish-led SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, were built as a ground partner against ISIS. They controlled huge areas, they held the detainee camps, and they were protected quietly by American backing. Now the production is fading, and the new Syrian army, the new Syrian leadership under Ahmed al-Shara is moving fast to take territory, oil and gas fields, and key infrastructure. In parallel, a ceasefire is announced, and the language is integration. SDF fighters folded into the Syrian army and security services. Officials appointed from the Kurdish side promises about culture and language and this idea of bringing everyone together. But on the ground, the reports are still of fighting in multiple points. Now, and the Kurdish message is very blunt. They say they're facing systematic killing and brutal attacks, and they feel abandoned. Now, when a partner is abandoned, vacuum opens up. And the vacuums in Syria never stay empty. Definitely not in this season that we're seeing right now. Now watch this next. The logistics tell you the true strategy. Now when the coalition talks about handing over El Khul and other detention sites, this is not paperwork. This is a signal that the US is ready to let the new Syrian state own the ISIS file. And it's happening while Washington's focus shifts hard to a different front, to Iran. That shift leaves the Kurdish zone exposed, exactly when Damascus is pushing in and Turkey is standing behind that push. We also saw the reminder that ISIS is not past tense problem. The US has hit ISIS again after 2 American soldiers were killed in Syria last month. That tells you the threat is still active. And it tells you the Americans do not want to get dragged back into a long ground commitment, at least not in that part of the Middle East. So the US is on the move. It reduces protection, it pushes for one Syria, it keeps counterterrorism strikes, and hopes the new regime can hold the prisons. That hope is a gamble, because the prisons and camps are the fuse, the very fuse that lights up the keg in Syria. Now let's bring Turkey. Let's bring the country of Turkey into the picture. Because Turkey is not watching this. Turkey is shaping the events in front of our eyes. Turkish leaders are publicly lining up against any military action on Iran. President Erdogan is speaking about standing against moves that drag the region into chaos. He's describing Iran's unrest and pressure as a new test for Tehran. Now, at the same time, Turkey is strengthening its position in Syria and even trying to expand its footprint in Gaza through civilian activity and future security ideas. And from Jerusalem's view, this looks like one coordinated trend. Turkey leverages its relationship with President Trump, gains political standing, and turns that into influence on the ground, in Syria and elsewhere. And in Syria, the assessment is that Turkish support helped the Syrian army gain ground against the Kurds in the northeast, training, logistics, and a strategic partnership. So while the Iranian axis is taking blows and looks pressured, another umbrella is rising in the north, a Sunni Islamist Syria, backed by Turkey and Qatar, pushing minorities into a weaker position and putting Israel in a tighter box, one that has already been very difficult. Yair's question is the right one. Should Israel accept a deal that requires pulling the IDF out of the areas it took after Assad fell, including the Mount Hermon zone and the buffer area? Now my read is, not now, and not on promises. Not while the Kurdish zone is collapsing, not while ISIS camps are wobbling, not while Turkey is building a forward position through Damascus. Israel learned the hard way on October 7, 2023, what happens when you trade terrain and time for words. And right now, Syria is still proving what it actually is, a new Syria in speeches, but on the ground, a regime that is still fighting, still pressuring minorities, and still relying on outside backers. There's another Israeli concern. If Damascus feels momentum in the northeast, it may look south next, towards the Druze area of Sueda, where Israel sees an allied community and a moral and strategic obligation. In summary, Israel holds the high ground and the buffer because it buys early warning and control, and because in this region, control is security. Over the next 7 days, I see 3 different tracks playing out. Track 1 is the ceasefire track. Do the 4 days of consultation actually produce a workable mechanism, or do we see more clashes around Kobani, Hasaka, and Kamishli? Track 2 is the ISIS detention track. Who physically controls El Khul? Who controls the prisons, like the one in Shaddadi? How many detainees are really missing? And whether the new Syrian forces can hold that line without chaos, without revenge, or without leakage. Track 3 is the Turkey track. Do we see Turkish pressure at the border, including fire at Kurds trying to cross? Do we see deeper Turkish military posture inside Syria? And do we see Turkey using the political channel to push a US-backed security arrangement that Israel has no choice but to reject? The first real sign is simple. If the new Syrian regime can secure the ISIS facilities quietly, without propaganda, without massacres, and without a new wave of escapes, it stabilizes. If it can't, Syria becomes an export of violence once again. So here's a summary. Syria is reuniting by force. Turkey is backing the winners, and the ISIS file is the fuse that can blow the whole region wide open. Now here's a question back to Yair. If Washington pushes harder for a Syria deal, what is Israel's non-negotiable line you will state on air tonight? El-Khul is the immediate trigger. Kurdish pullback means ISIS risk goes up. Ceasefires announced. Fighting is still reported. Damascus wants SDF folded into the new army. US posture is shifting. Logistics show it. America still hits ISIS, but avoids deep commitment. And Turkey is the power behind Damascus and also shielding Iran politically. Minorities fear becoming second class under Islamic rule, and Israel will not trade the buffer and the Khilmon for promises. So watch what happens in the camps, watch the ceasefire and Turkish footprint as the first markers of what's going to happen next in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Matti, for bringing your usual clarity to these vitally important issues. So to make one brief comment of my own here, we're talking about one of the subjects that is very hard to understand because it is saturated with many names, organizations, diplomacy, and very complex politics. But behind the scenes, you can clearly see the attempts of Turkey, a long-standing ally that has gotten very unfriendly in recent years and had almost become an enemy of Israel, with a leader who is openly anti-Semitic trying to gain a bigger foothold in the Middle East. Therefore, we in Israel remain on high alert, and here at TBN Israel, we will update you on every development. So keep spreading the truth, share, follow us, and most importantly, please hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Remember, this is a spiritual war. We need your help as prayer warriors. Keep praying for wisdom to our leaders, for the people of Iran to be freed of this evil regime that is controlling them, and for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Matti here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.